This is the Jackson Neill Sports Podcast. Welcome back to the podcast here on Friday, November 8th, 2019. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today, I have a special guest, Mike Rutherford, making his first appearance on the podcast. He's the founder and manager of CardChronicle.com, the college basketball editor for SB Nation, and the co-host of Ramsey and Rutherford on 790 KRD down in Louisville, Kentucky. Brought him on the podcast to talk about college basketball, and before we jump into that, I want to remind everyone that this podcast is available on all of your favorite platforms. That includes Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube, SoundCloud. New episodes come out every single Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, so make sure to subscribe on your favorite platform to stay up to date. So we've officially entered the time of the year where we have so many different sports going on. I mean, just last month, the NHL kicked off, and then the NBA as well. NFL's in full swing. College football's looking great. Tomorrow, game of the century between LSU and Alabama. So everything is in full season right now. And this week, college basketball also tipped off for the first time. So, with that in mind, I wanted to bring someone on to talk about the season, to preview the season, because with the way college basketball works and all the one-and-dones, it's kind of difficult to follow it year by year. I mean, last year Duke was the biggest story with R.J. Barrett, Cam Reddish, and of course Zion Williamson, and now all of those players are gone. So I wanted to get some insight onto, okay, who are the big teams this year? Who are the players to be looking out for? Who are some maybe other teams, mid-major squads who could be making some noise, and just get an overall preview of the season heading into this new year. So I brought on Mike to answer all of those questions and a little bit more. He has some really, really great insight, really knowledgeable about the game, and I'm sure that after listening to this, you're going to be a lot more prepared for the season. I certainly was after talking with him. So, with that said, let's jump right into it. Going into this season, what are some of the teams looking like to be the best? Like, who are some of the teams at the top of the rankings?
Michigan State was a near unanimous number one, even though they lost night one to Kentucky. I think they returned more established talent than anybody else in college basketball last season. They upset Duke last year in the Elite Eight, made it to the Final Four. They bring back Cassius Winston, who's pretty much everybody's National Player of the Year. Cassius Winston's actually the first team All-American from the previous season to come back to college basketball since Doug McDermott did it for Creighton back in 2012 and in 2013. So, typically in recent years when you've had a player good enough to be a postseason first-team AP All-American, they've gone ahead and made that leap to the NBA, or they've been seniors. Cassius Winston, the exception to that rule, was not great against Kentucky, but everybody's still expecting him to have a massive year. They bring back Xavier Tillman, who was a key contributor last year, Aaron Henry, who played big minutes, Kyle Arns, a lot of guys that are established college names. And they also have a solid freshman class led by Rocket Watts, who's probably going to have to be a starter. If there is a concern with Michigan State outside of losing on night one, it's the fact that Joshua Langford, who's a guy that everybody expected to be healthy and back after missing most of last season, is now going to be out until at least January with a lingering foot injury. And the way they're talking about him certainly sounds like he may not play at all this season. That's a big loss. Kentucky, the team that beat Michigan State, very, very good. Always loaded with young talent. They've got a couple of experienced guys. You kind of use that in air quotes because with Kentucky, experience means one season. So you've got Ashton Higgins back, who was their starting point guard last year. He's running the show again this season. Nick Richards is a junior down low who's, I think, made some solid leaps. He defended really well against Michigan State. And then E.J. Montgomery's a second-year big man as well. They've got to find a reliable post presence on offense. I'm not sure if they have that, but Tyrese Maxey, maybe the star of stars on opening night, was the player of the game at the Champions Classic. He was fantastic. He hit not the game-winning shot, but basically the game-sealing shot, a 25-footer. I think he's going to emerge as the alpha male on that Kentucky team. He's going to be their superstar this year. Duke should be fantastic. Kansas should be fantastic. Those two teams played the other Champions Classic game. It was sloppy. They'll both get a lot better. Louisville's the other top five team. They look terrific on opening night, beating Miami down. And then I think if you're looking for, somebody right outside that top five, a lot of people are pointing to Florida. They brought back a lot from last year. Andrew Nembhard's one of the most underrated players in the country at point guard. And they added the best grad transfer in America in Kerry Blackshear Jr., who comes over from Virginia Tech. He was terrific for them on their opening night. I think those are the six teams that most people have circled as the best in the country as we start the season.
Definitely, yeah, that kind of top tier. And that crazy thing about Michigan State being ranked number one, I saw it was the first time ever in Tom Izzo's tenure they were number one in the preseason, which just sounded kind of odd considering how great they've been. But the two teams, I want to look at a team like Duke because obviously last year they had this all-time in terms of just pure talent, one and done class with Zion Williamson, R.J. Barrett, and a couple other guys. How are they looking going into this season? How much have they retooled? I mean, you just mentioned them in this top tier. They're obviously, I guess, inexperienced with losing all of those top players, right?
Yeah, they do. The good news for them is they did get Trey Jones back, the starting point guard from last year. He was the one member of that four-man class that was kind of forgotten about at times last season until he got injured. Then everybody wanted to talk about Trey Jones. Him deciding to come back was a huge, huge blessing for Mike Krzyzewski. He's a solid offensive player. He played well enough on offense against Kansas to be the leading scorer, scored 15 points, dished out 7 assists. He's more of a facilitator, though. I think he's going to have to develop a at least somewhat reliable outside shot for them to have the right amount of spacing in their half-court sets. But he's one of the best on-ball defenders in all of college basketball. That's where his value really lies. It's going to be mostly the freshmen outside of him. Cassius Stanley was really good in their opener. I think Matthew Hurt is going to be their most reliable and consistent offensive player this season. I really like his game. Vernon Carey, the big man, he was the highest rated recruit in this class. But when you look at it, I mean, you're right. There's no Zion Williamson in this class. There's no R.J. Barrett in this class. There's no really Cam Reddish in this class. Like, I would be shocked if any of the Duke freshmen wind up becoming top 10 picks in the upcoming draft. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe somebody takes a flyer on a guy like Vernon Carey. But it seems like this is going to be a more traditional Duke freshman class that comes around a little bit slower, that maybe looks more like the solid college players and not the raw future NBA superstars. They do have some other returning talent. Alex O'Connell played big minutes last year. He's going to be back. Jack White, who was famous for missing like a billion consecutive three-pointers last year, is back again and hoping to find his outside shot. And then Wendell Moore and Javin DeLaurier are both back in the front court. So I think they've got some good young pieces. They've got some good quote unquote veteran pieces. If you want to refer to Trey Jones as a veteran, I think they're going to be fine. They may not be as exciting as last year, but I think Mike Krzyzewski's hope is that by the time the tournament rolls around, they'll be peaking more at the right time than last year's team was.
Definitely. Yeah, that was the problem with last year's teams. They seemed to almost peak maybe a little too early. And you're right about Trey Jones. I mean, watching him as an on-ball defender, one of my favorite things in college basketball. I was pretty excited to see him coming back, especially now in a bigger role. We'll get to see more of him. The other team I have a question about is this Kansas team. There's all of this NCAA noise, these investigations going around this program. I mean, that whole mess of their first night of their first night of basketball with Snoop Dogg and all that. How much of an impact do you think all of this noise around the program is going to have on this Jayhawk season?
It's going to come down to the players. I mean, I think that if they can tune it out and recognize the fact that any news that comes up over the next 5 months isn't going to affect their 2019-20 season, then they should be fine. I mean, they're going to hear about it. They've already got their notice of allegations. They're going to issue their response to that notice of allegations at some point in the next 2 months. I guess they had 90 days to respond. So the NCAA is probably going to say something back to them before the season ends. And there are going to be stories written, especially if they do make a deep run in the NCAA tournament. You're going to have that national media that doesn't pay a whole lot of attention to college basketball until the NCAA tournament, writing stories about them being the issue with the sport and a reflection of all that's wrong and all that stuff. And they're going to bring up the Snoop Dogg thing and the Bill Self wearing that gigantic Adidas shirt and that chain during that video. All that stuff's going to come up, but they have to recognize that it's not going to affect their season. Like, there's no way the timeline doesn't add up in a manner that would allow the NCAA to ban them from the postseason this year. There's nothing that can happen over the next few months that's going to keep Kansas from making a run of the national title if that's what they're going to wind up doing. Like, they're going to be postseason eligible. They're going to be fine. And I think if you're a player for the Jayhawks right now, that's what you tell yourself. This is a season like any other. We don't pay attention to the news that much, regardless of what's being said. We're not going to let that happen. With Bill Self, maybe it's more of a concern because I think he definitely is caught in the crosshairs more than a lot of the other head coaches that have been, wrapped into this whole thing. If he can maintain focus and, sort of just go about his daily routine and block out the outside noise, he should be fine. But it's a lot tougher to do when you're a head coach and you know that your reputation's on the line, and you know that there's a potential that you could get a show cause penalty or that you could get a massive suspension to start next season, or that you're going to have the stain of potentially having that Final Four from a couple of years taken down. I think it's a little bit of a concern, but I think in this day and age where you've got so much going on and these kids are so preoccupied with, school and class and everything else going on during the season, I think they'll be able to put the blinders on and really just focus on their 2019-20 season. I'll put it this way. If Kansas doesn't win a national title this year, I don't think it's going to be because of any of the outside noise.
Okay, yeah, definitely. I think you're right with the whole players. I mean, especially nowadays with this culture of one and dones and huge player turnovers at schools. It's like a lot of these players, have just gotten there that they don't really care about the past Final Fours. I think you're right. I think Bill Self is the only person that really would be have the biggest worries and have the most to lose from this investigation and probably be the most preoccupied with it. But I mean, this is one of the most decorated college basketball head coaches of this generation, so we'll just have to see if he's able to shut it out. I think he will be able to. But I want to switch the conversation out to the National Player of the Year, because you mentioned Cassius Winston. That's the guy I keep on hearing about. He was awesome last year and came back, like you said. But maybe who are some other names, or is Cassius Winston just the clear runaway favorite?
I think on paper he is. He did not look the part on opening night, and I think the issue with Michigan State, because they've got more quality non-conference opponents to play here before they get into Big Ten play. They're going to play Seton Hall in just a week actually, which will be a nice test. He'll go head-to-head with Myles, who's another front runner for National Player of the Year. But I think the name that you have to talk about as we sit here on opening week, North Carolina's Cole Anthony put on quite the show in his college debut Wednesday night, scoring 34 points, lit up Notre Dame. Got into an absolute zone where it seemed like he couldn't miss. He comes to UNC with a lot of hype. Greg Anthony's son. He was, according to a lot of people, the best player in last year's class, even though he didn't end up on top in most of the rankings. And he's going to have the ultimate green light this year. There's not a whole lot around him. There's not a whole lot of offensive talent that's going to use up a lot of possessions. If he's going to score, 35 points, they should be okay. I think the issue with North Carolina is going to be what happens when he has an off night, but that's a topic for another day. He's fantastic. He's going to put up a massive amount of numbers for a team that should be pretty good. I think he'll be right there in the National Player of the Year race. You mentioned Myles Powell. He's going to score a bunch of points for a Seton Hall team that brings back just about everybody from last year. They should be really good. They should be nationally relevant all season long. And then Marcus Howard, who is arguably the best pure scorer in college basketball. He comes back to Marquette for one more season. He had a bunch of games last year where he scored 35 or more points. He scored 38 in their first game to start the season. I think he's going to be an explosive guy. The issue with Marcus Howard making a run for National Player of the Year is his team going to be good enough for him to really garner enough votes? Because a lot of times, they don't give this award to a guy that's putting up 30 points a game for a team that goes 14 and 18. You have to be on a team that's at least nationally relevant, NCAA tournament good. And the question with Marquette is, can they replace the loss of the Hauser brothers, who both opted to transfer in the offseason, one to Virginia, one to Michigan State? If Marquette's good enough to be like an NCAA tournament team and Howard is putting up ridiculous numbers and leading the nation in scoring, then he should be in the mix for National Player of the Year. I think the concern is that Marquette is going to fall off too significantly for him to garner an award like that. But those are the biggest names at the top of the list. I think Cole Anthony, Myles Powell, Marcus Howard, those are the top threats to Cassius Winston.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually had Cole Anthony's name written down, especially after that huge night. And I saw in one of your recent articles, the 10 predictions that Cole Anthony, you said, would be one of the most fun players to watch, and that certainly came true for these first couple of nights so far. Another team I wanted to talk about, because I saw they came into the season with a lot of noise around them, and because of their giant recruiting class. I noticed you didn't mention them in your top tier of teams, but I'm talking about Memphis. They got as many rated, the top rated recruit, and a couple other big guys. What are some reasonable expectations for this Memphis team? Because obviously Penny Hardaway is making a lot of noise as head coach with the recruits he's bringing in.
Yeah, the reasonable expectations, that's a fantastic question, and I don't think anybody knows exactly how to answer it, and that is the reason why Memphis is the most intriguing team in college basketball this season. Their recruiting class, screams top 10, but the program hasn't been in that place in a long time. Penny Hardaway, for as much as he's done on the recruiting trail, this is the second year that he's been a college head coach. He had zero experience coming into last season. He's been an AAU guy. He's been a high school guy. He had, no experience, not just coaching college kids, but running a college program. It went okay last year, but it didn't go well enough they weren't enough of an overachiever that I think everybody looked at this year's team and said, well, they're going to be a top 10 good because he's got top 10 talent and we know what he's doing. I think the jury's still definitely out on Penny Hardaway. The talent speaks for itself. I mean, James Wiseman is going to be, if not the number one pick, certainly a top 5 pick in next year's NBA draft. Precious Achiuwa is the other big-time freshman. He's going to be the perfect complement to him down low. I do worry about the team's lack of a returning established college player. Jeremiah Martin did so much for them last year, and he was so good, and now he's gone. I think they went after some grad transfers. The kid from Arkansas, Little Rock, was committed there. I think if he had been able to get eligible and been able to play, he would have helped them out considerably, because you just don't see teams that don't have at least one proven, reliable player with college experience. You don't see those types of teams make Final Fours. You don't see them win national titles. You can be driven by freshmen, but you have to have at least that one veteran presence to calm everybody down and rely on his experience. Memphis does not have that. They do have, just loaded with talent. Boogie Ellis, I think, is going to be a good player. Jaden Hardaway, I think, is going to be a good player. Alex Lomax can do a lot of great things. It's going to come down to how does Penny figure out how to divvy up these minutes. You've got a lot of kids with a lot of expectations for themselves who expect to play a lot of minutes. He can't play everybody. He played a bunch of guys in their season opener, reliable minutes, but he's got to make sure that everybody's happy. That's what Mike Krzyzewski and John Calipari have been so good at, taking these kids who have these me-first attitudes, who expect to score 35 points a game, and making them buy into the concept of team. Maybe Penny Hardaway can do that. Maybe he can't. It's going to be a really, really interesting season. I'm excited to watch them play some good teams during the non-conference portion of the year. And then getting into AAC play, the Americans should be a pretty good conference again, especially at the top. I think Wichita State is going to be back. Houston should be really good. They've got Quentin Grimes eligible, and then Cincinnati's always going to be good. So they're going to be a really fun team to follow all season long. I hope you can find where CBS Sports Network is on your TVs, because that's where they're going to be playing a bunch. But they're going to be a lot of fun. But as far as reasonable expectations, man, I have zero idea of what to expect.
Yeah, I mean it's a wild team to be looking at. As I read more and more about them, I saw that recruiting class. It's like, you're right. Usually when you get these big time recruits, you think of someone like Calipari or Krzyzewski. Usually they're the guys getting them. So at least the coaching is a standard. It's a constant. We know it's a good coach. With Penny Hardaway, we have no idea how he's going to be able to deal with these, big time freshmen. And then the fact that there is no senior leadership or, more experienced leadership. You're right. I look at this Memphis team and there is so many questions. I just can't wait to see them in action.
And it's going to be fun too, because they're going to be challenged early on. They play Oregon in a neutral site location here next week. They're going to play a good Ole Miss team that has an explosive guard in Bree and Tyree. They play at Tennessee, which I think is going to be perhaps the most fun rivalry game in all of college basketball this season, with Penny Hardaway and Rick Barnes going at it last year after the game and kind of the squabble they had on the court during the game. And they also play Georgia right before conference play. Georgia has an explosive guard in Anthony Edwards. So they'll be tested by the time they get to AAC play. And I'm really curious to see how they live up to these tests.
Mm-hmm. So now I want to switch over and think about maybe some smaller schools, some mid-major schools. Because as I look at the top 25, as I look at some preseason rankings, there are some of these mid-major schools in these rankings. In your mind, is there maybe a top tier of these mid-major schools going into this season? Who are some of the schools that maybe are a little smaller, maybe we're not used to seeing in the top 25, but you think could break into there?
Yeah, outside of Gonzaga and St. Mary's, who I think everybody knows about, and I would probably lump Utah State into that category as well. They're a preseason top 20 team. They should run the Mountain West. Last year, Nevada had so much hype going into the season, and it wound up being Utah State who won both the regular season title in that conference and the tournament title in that conference. They bring back Sam Merrill, who's a potential All-American, and Nehemiah Pita, who's hurt right now. He's going to be healthy. He's a force inside. He didn't play in night one. They look shaky against, I think it was Montana State, but they should be a really, really good team. As far as teams more off the beaten path, I really like East Tennessee State. I've already written about them a few times. I think Steve Forbes is a rising star in the coaching ranks, and that 10 years from now, he's going to be one of the five, considered one of the 5 best coaches in the sport, and he's going to be at a major program. Would not be shocked at all if they won the Southern Conference and then upset somebody in the NCAA tournament. They should be really, really good. Vermont always runs the America East. They have a senior in Anthony Lamb, who's one of the best players in the country. I'd expect them to dominate that conference again and then get into the NCAA tournament, be like a 12 seed that everybody's picking to upset somebody, maybe a 13 seed. They can definitely make some noise. They gave Florida State a good game in last year's NCAA tournament. I expect them to be even better this year. Liberty should be really good. They won a game in the tournament last year. And then Harvard out of the Ivy League, They've run into some bad luck in the Ivy League tournament the last couple of years. They've had to play teams on their home court in the championship game despite being the top seed. This year, they're hosting the Ivy League tournament. They have one of the better players in the country in Bryce Aiken. They have, I think, the DNA of success. That they've been a really proven program for these last handful of years. I expect them to be really good. So keep an eye on all those teams. I'm trying to think of another one that nobody's talking about, but those are the ones that definitely stand out to me. Colgate, I'll throw them out of the Patriot League too. I think they can be really good. They were pretty damn good last year. I think they should be even better this season.
Some great teams to watch maybe when there's not a huge marquee game on that night, especially that East Tennessee State. I'm glad you mentioned them because I've read a couple different things that have ranked them a lot higher than, I'm not really familiar with that program, I'll admit. So hearing about them is kind of cool, kind of different. But I want to end with probably the toughest question. I saved the hardest question for last, Mike. Who was your prediction going into this season to become the national champion? Who was your national title pick? You don't even get to see the March Madness bracket. It's hard enough when you have the field of 68, but I'm asking you all the way now in November. Who do you got?
Yeah, it's a tough question to answer. I'm sticking with the Michigan State pick, and I know it's a boring pick, but maybe a little bit less boring now that they've opened the season with a loss. I think that people overreact to the Champions Classic every single year. People also overreact to Michigan State losing games in November and December every single year. I wrote about this earlier when I did my predictions post. They've been ranked in 18 of Tom Izzo's last 20 seasons in the preseason poll. 13 of those 18 years, when the calendar has flipped to the new year, they've been ranked lower in the poll than they were to start the season. This is kind of what they do. They lose games in November and December. Izzo likes to break guys down and then build them back up. I think they can get a little bit healthier as time goes on. Even if they don't get Josh Langford back, Kyle Arns can get his legs back underneath and he can be fully healthy. I think Michigan State, by the time they get to the NCAA tournament, is going to be as good as anybody in the country. And they've got a proven guy in Cassius Winston, who is maybe the most clutch player in America. And I really think Aaron Henry is going to be a breakout star. He wasn't great against Kentucky, but he has all the tools necessary to be a tremendous college player, and I think also an NBA draft pick. Xavier Tillman is a guy that people don't have an answer for inside. I'm still on the Michigan State bandwagon. I wouldn't be shocked if they didn't wind up a number one seed in the NCAA tournament, and I wouldn't be shocked if they got beat at some point, but I still think they're the safest bet in the country right now. I'm going to trust Tom Izzo to get his second national title, and he needs it. I mean, it's been, almost 2 decades now since Michigan State won that national championship back in 2000. He needs that second title to solidify his reputation as one of the 3 or 4 best coaches in the sport and an all-time great.
Exactly. I mean, it will be 20 years by the time that the NCAA tournament rolls around. And yeah, you got to say something. I trust Tom Izzo as a head coach. A lot of times in college basketball, you have to look at those head coaches. Who do you think will have their team hitting the right form at the right part of the season? I think Tom Izzo definitely can do that. Well, Mike, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me.
Had a great time talking with Mike. Really, really knowledgeable on college basketball. Felt like I learned a lot during that conversation. And definitely make sure to go check out his stuff. He's been writing some really cool pieces leading up to this season. He has one right now. There's 10 predictions for the college basketball season. Lots of really cool nuggets in there. I definitely recommend that article. And if you want to check out his stuff, I'll have links down in the show notes so you can follow him and read his work. And with that, that's going to wrap it up for this episode of the Jackson Neill Sports Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Remember, make sure to subscribe and rate this podcast on your favorite platforms. That does a lot to help grow the show. And new episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. For more episodes of this podcast, as well as my music discussion podcast and my interview series, Anything Goes with Jackson Neill, go over to jacksonneillpodcast.com. That's the place where I archive all of my episodes. If you're a really big fan of this show, maybe you want to consider becoming a subscriber over on Patreon. Over there, for just a couple dollars a month or even $1 a month, you can get access to cool bonus content from all 3 of my podcasts, including bonus segments here from this sports podcast every single month. I write, record, produce, do everything for these podcasts myself as a full-time college student, so any little bit of support really goes a long way in helping me being able to spend more time making these cool episodes. If you want to stay up to date on everything I'm doing, you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at JacksonNeil20. Today's music is by Analog by Nature with their song CDK Sunday. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you all next time.